Section 1. The March Girls. The March sisters all want very much to be good, but they are also human. Each one has their own private sorrows and miseries. But one day, Marmee shows them that sometimes all you need is a good story to change your perspective. When Mr. March lost his property in trying to help an unfortunate friend, the two oldest girls begged to be allowed to do something towards their own support at least. Believing that they could not begin too early to cultivate energy, industry and independence, their parents consented and both fell to work with a hearty goodwill which, in spite of all obstacles, is sure to succeed at last. Margaret found a place as nursery governess and felt rich with her small salary. As she said, she was fond of luxury, and her chief trouble was poverty. She found it harder to bear than the others because she could remember a time when home was beautiful, life full of ease and pleasure, and want of any kind unknown. She tried not to be envious or discontented, but it was very natural that the young girl should long for pretty things, gay friends, accomplishments, and a happy life. At the King's, she daily saw all she wanted, for the children's older sisters were just out, and Meg caught frequent glimpses of dainty ball dresses and bouquets, heard lively gossip about theatres, concerts, sleighing parties, and merry-makings of all kinds, and saw money lavished on trifles which would have been so precious to her. Poor Meg seldom complained, but a sense of injustice made her feel bitter towards everyone sometimes. Jo happened to suit Aunt March, who was lame and needed an active person to wait upon her. The childless old lady had offered to adopt one of the girls when the troubles came, and was much offended because her offer was declined. The old lady wouldn't speak to them for a time, but happening to meet Jo at a friend's, something in her comical face and blunt manners struck the old lady's fancy, and she proposed to take her for a companion. This did not suit Jo at all, but she accepted the place since nothing better appeared, and to everyone's surprise got on remarkably well with her irascible relative. There was an occasional tempest, and once Jo marched home, declaring she couldn't bear it longer, but Aunt March always cleared up quickly and sent for her to come back again with such urgency that she could not refuse, for in her heart she rather liked the peppery old lady. I suspect that the real attraction was a large library of fine books. The moment Aunt March took her nap or was busy with company, Jo hurried to this quiet place and, curling herself up in the easy chair, devoured poetry, romance, history, travels and pictures like a regular bookworm. But, like all happiness, it did not last long, for as sure as she had just reached the heart of the story, the sweetest verse of a song or the most perilous adventure of her traveller, a shrill voice called, "Josephine! Josephine!" Jo's ambition was to do something very splendid. What it was, she had no idea as yet, but left it for some time to tell her, and meanwhile found her youngest affliction in the fact that she couldn't read, run, and write as much as she liked. A quick temper, sharp tongue, and restless spirit were always getting her into scrapes, and her life was a series of ups and downs which were both comic and pathetic. Beth was too bashful to go to school. It had been tried, but she suffered so much that it was given up, and she did her lessons at home with her father. She was a housewifely little creature and helped Hannah keep home neat and comfortable for the workers, never thinking of any reward but to be loved. Long, quiet days she spent, not lonely nor idle, for her little world was peopled with imaginary friends, and she was by nature a busy bee. There were 6 dolls to be taken up and dressed every morning, for Beth was a child still and loved her pets as well as ever. Not one whole or handsome one among them. All were outcasts till Beth took them in. For when her sisters outgrew these idols, they passed to her because Amy would have nothing old or ugly. Beth cherished them all the more tenderly for that very reason and set up a hospital for infirm dolls. No pins were ever stuck into their cotton vitals, no harsh words or blows were ever given them, no neglect ever saddened the heart of the most repulsive, but all were fed and clothed, nursed and caressed with an affection which never failed. Beth had her troubles as well as the others, and not being an angel but a very human little girl. She often wept a little weep, as Joe said, because she couldn't take music lessons and have a fine piano. She loved music so dearly, tried so hard to learn and practiced away so patiently at the jiggling old instrument that it did seem as if someone, not to hint Aunt March, ought to help her. Nobody did, however, and nobody saw Beth wipe the tears off the yellow keys that wouldn't keep in tune when she was all alone. If anybody had asked Amy what the greatest trial of her life was, she would have answered at once, "My nose." When she was a baby, Joe had accidentally dropped her into the coal hod, and Amy insisted that the fall had ruined her nose forever. It was not big nor red like poor Petria's. It was only rather flat, and all the pinching in the world could not give it an aristocratic point. No one minded it but herself, but Amy felt deeply the want of a Grecian nose and drew whole sheets of handsome ones to console herself. Little Raphael, as her sisters called her, had a decided talent for drawing and was never so happy, and when copying flowers, designing fairies or illustrating stories with poor specimens of art. She got through her lessons as well as she could and managed to escape reprimands by being a model of deportment. She was a great favorite with her maids, but good-tempered and possessing the happy art of pleasing without effort. Her little airs and graces were much admired, so were her accomplishments. Amy was in a fair way to be spoiled, for everyone petted her, and her small vanities and selfishness were growing nicely. One thing, however, rather quenched the vanities. She had to wear her cousin's clothes. Now Florescence's mamma hadn't a particle of taste, and Amy suffered deeply at having to wear a red instead of a blue bonnet, unbecoming gowns, and fussy aprons that did not fit. "My only comfort," she said to Meg, with tears in her eyes, "is that Mother doesn't take tucks in my dresses whenever I'm naughty, as Maria Park's mother does. My dear, it's really dreadful for sometimes. She's so bad. Her frock is up to her knees, and she can't come to school. When I think of this degradation, I feel that I can bear even my flat nose and purple gown with yellow skyrockets on it." Meg was Amy's confidante and monitor, and by some strange attractions of opposites, Joe was gentle Beth's. To Joe alone did the shy child tell her thoughts, and over her big harum-scarum sister Beth unconsciously exercised more influence than anyone in the family. The two older girls were a great deal to one another, but each took one of the younger sisters into her keeping and watched over her in her own way. Playing mother, they called it, and put their sisters in the places of discarded dolls with the maternal instinct of little women. "Has anybody got anything to tell? It's been such a dismal day. I'm really dying for some amusement," said Meg as they sat sewing together that evening. "I had a queer time with Aunt today, and as I got the best of it, I'll tell you about it," began Jo, who dearly loved to tell stories. "I was reading that everlasting Belsham and droning away as I always do, for Aunt soon drops off, and then I take out some nice book and read like furry till she wakes up. I actually made myself sleepy, and before she began to nod, I gave such a gape that she asked me what I meant by opening my mouth wide enough to take the whole book in at once. I wish I could, and be done with it," said I, trying not to be saucy. Then she gave me a long lecture on my sins and told me to sit and think them over while she just lost herself for a moment. The minute her cap began to bob like a top-heavy dahlia, I whipped the Vicar of Wakefield out of my pocket and read away, with one eye on him and one on Aunt. I would just got to where they all tumbled into the water when I forgot and laughed out loud. Aunt woke up and, being more good-natured after her nap, told me to read a bit and show what frivolous work I preferred to the worthy and instructive Belsham. I did my very best and she liked it, though she only said, "I don't understand what it's all about. Go back and begin it, child." "Did she own she liked it?" asked Meg. "Oh, bless you, no, but she let old Belsham rest, and when I ran back after my gloves this afternoon, there she was, so hard at the wizard that she didn't hear me laugh, and I danced a jig in the hall because of the good time coming. What a pleasant life she might have, if only she chose. I don't envy her much, in spite of her money, for after all rich people have about so many worries as poor ones, I think," added Jo. "That reminds me," said Meg, "that I haven't got something to tell. At the King's today, I found everybody in a flurry, and one of the children said that her oldest brother had done something dreadful, and Papa had sent him away. I heard Mrs. King crying and Mr. King talking very loud, and Grace and Ellen turned away their faces when they passed me, so I shouldn't see how red and swollen their eyes were. I didn't ask any question, of course, but I felt so sorry for them, and was rather glad I hadn't any wild brothers to do wicked things and disgrace the family." "I think being disgraced in school is a great deal tryingner than anything bad boys can do," said Amy, shaking her head as if her experience of life had been a deep one. Susie Perkins came to school today with a lovely red carnelian ring. I wanted it dreadfully and wished I was her with all my might. Well, she drew a picture of Mr. Davis with a monstrous nose and a hump, and the words, "Young ladies, my eye is upon you," coming out of his mouth in a balloon thing. We were laughing over it, when all of a sudden his eye was on us, and he ordered Susie to bring up her slate. She was paralyzed with fright, but she went, and oh, what do you think he did? He took her by the ear, just fancy how horrid, and led her to the recitation platform and made her stand there half an hour, holding the slate so everyone could see. I didn't envy her then, for I felt that millions of carnelian rings wouldn't have made me happy after that. I never should have got over such a agonizing mortification. I saw something I liked this morning, and I meant to tell it at dinner, but I forgot, said Beth, putting Joe's topsy-turvy basket in order as she talked. When I went to get some oysters for Hannah, Mr. Lawrence was in the fish shop. A poor woman came in with a pail and mop and asked Mr. Cutter if he would let her do some scrubbing for a bit of fish because she hadn't any dinner for her children and had been disappointed of a day's work. Mr. Cutter was in a hurry and said
"No,"
rather crossly, so she was going away, looking hungry and sorry, when Mr. Lawrence hooked up a big fish with the crooked end of his cane and held it out to her. She was so glad and surprised, she took it right into her arms and thanked him over and over. He told her to
"Go along and cook it."
And she hurried off so happy. Wasn't it good of him? Oh, she did look so funny hugging the big slippery fish and hoping Mr. Lawrence's bed in heaven would be easy. When they had laughed at Beth's story, they asked their mother for one, and after a moment's thought, she said soberly, "As I sat cutting out blue flannel jackets today at the rooms, I felt very anxious about Father, and thought how lonely and helpless we should be if anything happened to him. It was not a wise thing to do, but I kept on worrying till an old man came in with an order for some clothes. He sat down near me,
and I began to talk to him, for he looked poor and tired and anxious.
Have you sons in the army? I asked, for the note he brought was not to me.
"Yes, ma'am. I had 4, but 2 were killed. One is a prisoner, and I am going to the other, who is very sick in a Washington hospital,"
he answered quietly.
You have done a great deal for your country, sir, I said, feeling respect now and instead of pity.
"Not a mite more than I ought, ma'am. I'd go myself if I was any use. As I ain't, I'll give my boys and give 'em free."
He spoke so cheerfully, looked so sincere, and seemed so glad to give his all that I was ashamed of myself. I would given 1 man and thought it too much, while he gave 4 without grudging them. I had all my girls to comfort me at home, and his last son was waiting miles away to say goodbye to him perhaps. I felt so rich, so happy thinking of my blessings, that I made him a nice bundle, gave him some money, and thanked him heartily for the lesson he had taught me. Tell another story, Mother, one with a moral to it, like this. I like to think about them afterwards, if they are real and not too preachy, said Joe, after a minute's silence. Mrs. March smiled and began at once, for she had told stories to this little audience for many years and knew how to please them. Once upon a time, there were 4 girls who had enough to eat and drink and wear, a good many comforts and pleasures, kind friends and parents who loved them dearly, and yet they were not contented. Here the listeners stole sly looks at one another and began to sew diligently. These girls were constantly saying, "If only we had this," or "If we could only do that," quite forgetting how much they already had and how many things they actually could do. So they asked an old woman what spell they could use to make them happy, and she said, "When you feel discontented, think over your blessings and be grateful." Being sensible girls, they decided to try her advice and soon were surprised to see how well off they were. One discovered that money couldn't keep shame and sorrow out of rich people's houses. Another that, though she was poor, she was a great deal happier. with her youth, health, and good spirits than a certain fretful, feeble old lady who couldn't enjoy her comforts. A third that, disagreeable as it was to help get dinner, it was harder still to go begging for it, and the fourth, that even carnelian rings were not so valuable as good behavior. So they agreed to stop complaining, to enjoy the blessings they already possessed, and try to deserve them, lest they should be taken away entirely instead of increased. And I believe they were never disappointed or sorry that they took the old woman's advice. Now, Marmee, that is very cunning of you to turn our own stories against us and give us a sermon instead of a romance, cried Meg. I like that kind of sermon. It's the sort Father used to tell us, said Beth thoughtfully. I don't complain near as much as the others do, and I shall be more careful than ever now, for I have had warning from Susie's downfall, said Emmy morally. We needed that lesson, and we won't forget it, said Joe.
An extract from Little Women by Louisa May Alcott. Louisa May Alcott, 1832 to 1888, an American writer, was best known for her novel Little Women, from which this extract has been taken.